I just bought a toaster recently. Well, I had one, but I toasted low-carb bread, and it exploded. So I go to buy another toaster. I didn't want any trouble. I went to a nice store and talked to this nice young lady. I saw a toaster for $49. I said, I'll take this toaster. It was a lovely toaster, as toasters go. And she said to me, could I have your name and address? No. You can have $49. And I will take this toaster. And that's really all I planned on today. What do you say?
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, October the 30th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and a rumba flamenca, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, my take, Varney and Company, Hugh, Hewitt, bishop-barron, Ayn Rand quote of the day, Speaker Johnson, Matt Gaetz, and the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
The essential point to grasp is that in dealing with capitalism, we are dealing with an evolutionary process. At the heart of capitalism is creative destruction. Situations emerge in the process of creative destruction in which many firms may have to perish that nevertheless would be able to live on vigorously and usefully if they could weather a particular storm. Joseph A. Schumpeter. We hear plenty from the great Schumpeter throughout this book for good reason, but in this quote we see three things that are all vital to a worldview of free enterprise. One is the ever-changing nature of it. The dynamics of human action, human needs, and human capabilities are always changing, and therefore the manner in which this is manifested in the marketplace is always changing. This inevitably leads to failures and successes, the latter often creating the former. But not all creative destruction is the natural result of competitive reality. Much of it flows from the inability to survive difficult times. Free enterprise involves offense and defense.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Again, like any abortion-supporting true Catholic, Ted played Augustine of Hippo to his dear 104-year-old mother, St. Monica. Nearing his deathbed, Ted decided it was high time to get himself right with Jesus after all these years. So he went right to the top. Like Michael Corleone writing a big check in Rome, he penned an epistle to His Holiness, begging for absolution on the grounds that he'd always been a good liberal who fought for the poor, opposed the death penalty, and I also want you to know that even though I am ill, I'm committed to doing everything I can to achieve access to health care for everyone in my country. Now that, you have to admit, is an instant classic of trying to have it both ways. We lefties may disdain foxholes, but when the end is nigh, we hop right in alongside Father Coughlin and Bishop Sheen and beg them to pray for us. And what thanks did Ted get? Here in Rome, Ted Kennedy is a nobody, said a Vatican spokesman. He's a legend with his own constituency. Just like Michael Corleone. Carlos Marcello. Bill Clinton. That would be Calogero Minacori to his friends, as played by William Jefferson Blythe III to his friends, should he actually have any. Marcello faked just about everything about himself, including his citizenship, on account of he wasn't one. A U.S. citizen, I mean. Born in Tunisia in 1910, he immigrated illegally to Louisiana with his parents a year later, became a petty criminal in the French Quarter, where he was unfavorably compared to Fagin and Oliver Twist by the local newspapers, but eventually rose to control the rackets in the oldest mafia town in America. Together with Madden pal Frank Costello, Marcello became king of the slot machine rackets in the Big Easy, which makes our boy Billy Jeff Blythe III, a.k.a. Clinton, the perfect actor to play him. For like Marcello's, much of Clinton's background is either invented or obscured. The man from Hope was indeed born in Hope, Arkansas, but he only lived there till he was 4. For all practical purposes, Bill Clinton is from Hot Springs, Tammany Hall South, the retirement home of Owen Madden, who moved there less than 48 hours after his rival and partner, Dutch Schultz, was shot to death in the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey, on October 23, 1935. The largest illegal gambling town in America, Bubbles, as it's called locally, was also the home away from home of Al Capone, Madden's buddy and colleague, and a notorious hideout for mobsters on the lam from the law, in places where there actually was a law. And who was Madden's nurse and assistant anesthesiologist in his final days? Why, none other than Virginia Kelly Clinton. Little Billy sat at the great gangster's feet at Madden's favorite hangout, the Southern Club and Grill on Central Avenue in Hot Springs, right there where the main street of Bubbles takes a turn to the northwest and passes kitty corner from the Arlington Hotel, where Capone used to stay before Kevin Costner, or Elliot Ness, or the feds, or whoever, got after him. Clinton was best friends with the son of Madden's lawyer, Hugh Byram Hearst Sr., who did some jail time himself. and soaked up all kinds of good stuff there in the front room of the Southern. Not only the atmosphere of the old wigwam on 14th Street, but also the whatever-it-takes ethos of the wise guys passing through. Most of them illegal immigrants, and all of them, I'm proud to say, card-carrying Democrats. Clinton was the perfect Democratic candidate, a liberal masquerading as a moderate, a draft-dodging Rhodes Scholar. If there's anything we liberals love more than a man not in uniform, it's a big brain like a Rhodes Scholar. And best of all, a guilty white Southern boy governor. We ran him against George Herbert Walker Bush. Enough said. When Poppy barfed into the lap of the Japanese prime minister, we knew he could be had. And when he just sat there with his pet gargoyle, James A. Baker III, perched on his shoulder as the news of the fall of the Berlin Wall came roaring over the wires, well, let's put it this way. He should have been standing on a White House balcony, firing an automatic weapon into the air, like some kind of super waspy version of Tony Montana at the end of De Palma's Scarface, instead of acting like he was late for his tea time. And so, a guy most people had never heard of a year before became President of the United States. Sound familiar? Mayrose Pritzi, Nancy Pelosi, the femme fatale so memorably portrayed by Angelica Houston in her daddy's movie Pritzi's Honor, finds a real-life counterpart in the lovely and talented Annunziata D'Alessandro Pelosi, net worth $19 million. She's the daughter of old Tommy D'Alessandro, whose parking garage connections forced him out of the Maryland gubernatorial race in 1953, and the sister of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Rusi D'Alessandro, arrested in 1954 along with 15 other youths, as Time magazine reported at the time, for taking two girls, ages 13 and 11, on an all-night joyride and keeping them in a furnished flat for a week. He was acquitted of the rape charge, but out of the investigation of this case grew a perjury indictment against 21-year-old Rusi. Nancy's mama, also named Annunziata, got into trouble that same year when she admitted on the witness stand to receiving $11,000 from a contractor named Dominic Paracci, who was convicted of conspiracy to defraud the city. Oddly enough, Paracci's daughter married Tommy D'Alessandro III, who later followed his father into the Baltimore mayoralty. Let's see. Italian, politically powerful family, skeletons in closet. Check. All in the family. Johnny Torrio, Saul Alinsky. Remember Chicago in the 1920s? Well, neither do I, but them's what's knows the history of Democratic organized crime can tell you who this jackass was. The man who lost out to Al Capone. Torrio was a philosophical genius, the man who schooled later generations of Chicago gangsters in the ways of the world, i.e., community organizing. It was Torrio who organized the South Side, teaching his fellow mobsters the first and best rule of rub-outs. Take your opponent out in the primary, well before the general election. Accordingly, it was Torrio who contracted the elimination of Chicago gangland boss Big Jim Colosimo, paving the way for his gang's ascendancy in the Hyde Park neighborhood. Think of Torrio as a visionary, the guy who wrote the book on theory, but who didn't quite have the stones to put it into practice. Casting Alinsky is perfect. He studied at the feet of Capone's second banana, Frank Nitti, so he certainly knows the territory. The Terrible Jennas. Rahm Emanuel, David Axelrod, Valerie Jarrett. The Windy City Bad Bellies, starring Rahm the Dutchman Emanuel, the son and nephew of Israeli Irgun and Stern Gang terrorists/freedom fighters. The Red Diaper Baby, David Jake Lingle Axelrod, the former Chicago Tribune journalist turned Daily Machine hack and campaign manager, and consummate Chi-Town fixer Valerie Ma Barker Jarrett. The Jennas were the triggermen for the old Chicago Combine, before it turned into the combination of Democrats and Republicans that it is today. They took out Scarface Al's enemies molto con brio, but eventually learned the hard way the first lesson of gangland, that everybody except the big fella is expendable. Today, they are all buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery right next to Dean O'Banion, Jack Ryan, one of the early opposition candidates for the community organizer-in-chief, and the sworn enemy of Al Capone. to be announced. One fine day, a young man of great ambition and an utterly ruthless nature suddenly appeared in Chicago, as if from out of nowhere. Okay, Brooklyn and the 5 Points, where he was taken under the wing of the city's leading South Side thug. Quickly surpassing his mentor, he organized the community, developing productive relationships with union members, employee groups, and Democratic politicians, and treating himself to the best in clothes, transportation, whiskey, and cigars as he burnished his man-of-the-people image. There was nothing, it seemed, he could not do. Mounting a nationwide search for the perfect candidate.
And that was Chapter 7 of Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left.
Rule 8. It is a damnable lie that humility disallows Christians from standing up for what they believe in the cultural and political forum. The requirements of Christian piety do not include the forfeiture of hallowed ground to the Jacobins. On the contrary, humility and piety require the God-fearing defense of culture. One humbly submits oneself to the crusade. In reality, humility explicates a certain disposition, not a certain act. As Aristotle wrote of all virtue, prudence, not humility, governs the Christian exigencies of forming real-time, daily rejoinders to the radical enemies of culture and civil order. If anything, true humility empowers retrogrades to fight evil in their midst. In other words, we are allowed, and in many cases even obligated, to fight back if necessary in word and in deed. Many cowardly Christian men on the right wing have made, from their quietude, a comfortable, unchallenged life for themselves. Through a cleverly perverted sense of Christian humility, such men have unabashedly popularized their habitual submission to radicals. They even presume to lecture American retrogrades about the virtues of their own complacent acts of pusillanimity. We must suffer the slings and arrows of this world in stoicism, they say, as they profit in peace, dodging any real suffering while the rest of us fight. What they're really avoiding is the suffering itself. To be sure, such phony conservatives have acquitted themselves very poorly in the defense of Western civilization because they don't care much for it except in what it can do for them. And this attitude reflects the opposite of humility. This attitude is really self-service and cowardice, dressed up in the moral garb of bourgeois Christianity, fake Christianity. This rationalization has grown in popularity to the extent that many earnest retrogrades ask, is resisting evil with good evil? Of course not. We respond to those who have characterized metaphorical draft dodging as brave humility with Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Also recall the sage advice of St. Jerome. Nothing is more to be feared than too long a peace. You are deceived if you think that a Christian can live without persecution. He suffers the greatest persecution of all who lives under none. A storm puts a man on his guard and obliges him to exert his utmost efforts to avoid shipwreck. Note Jerome's spiked words of alarm, which fustily enjoin the Christian to put up his guard and to spend his utmost efforts on the fight. St. Jerome invokes neither pacifism nor passivism. Finally, recall St. Augustine's admonition. Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. In actuality, The phony conservatives who mischaracterize cowardice as humility frequently number among the militant mods who would speak out more loudly against retrogrades than radicals. The pious, affected quietude of these Judases is frequently pierced by their own traitors' voices in order to distance themselves from retrogrades. Indeed, the radical imbalance currently plaguing the West has benefited more parties than just the radicals themselves. It works to the benefit of the silent, copacetic Christians who profit from their own non-interference in radical machinations. And this is an ugly fact in the grand scheme of things. In short, pacifism is not humility. Humility constitutes one's attitude at the end of the day, when one hits one's knees in prayer or when the head hits the pillow. But it does not require a retrograde to submit to evil. As Thomas Aquinas points out, humility renders the spirit strong, not weak. Lastly, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá wrote, "Unless you mortify yourself, you'll never become a prayerful soul." For gentle-fibered men who would rather be silent than fight, the best means of self-mortification may just be to enter the fray.
And that was Rule 8 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
One situation spurs you to act on your God-given masculine instinct. The other rips your still-beating heart from your chest and demoralizes you. I agree success in our system is based on building coalitions, but those have to be coalitions of the willing. What is the point in giving Ditch McConnell or Lindsey Grahamnesty another 6 years in the United States Senate? Why would I align myself, even temporarily, with someone who has more in common with Democrats than with me, especially when they come from red states like Kentucky and South Carolina? Who cares if the Democrat wins in those sorts of places? Because they'll be easier to beat in the next election in those states. But let a Republican like Ditch McConnell become an entrenched incumbent, and you'll suffer under his gangster government for decades. See, adults don't need instant gratification. Children do. Adults put off instant gratification because they see the bigger picture. Children get emotionally manipulated to act upon what's best right now, without any perspective. Granted, if a Scott Brown is the best you can do in the bluest of blue states like Massachusetts, so be it. But as groups like Club for Growth and Madison Project point out, there's no reason not to have a real conservative as the senator to every red state and the congressman to every red district. I say we start building from there, and then it's easier to keep the squishes of the world like Scott Brown in line once elected, when they're surrounded by a caucus led by the likes of Ted Cruz and not Ditch McConnell. There are some simple, notice I didn't say easy, steps to actually forging a real opposition party in America again. Before making the decades-long investment in a viable third party, why not try this? We don't have to be mascots for the GOP, but simply use the GOP as a means to an end when it suits us. I'm not talking about reforming the Republican Party, because it's well beyond that now. I'm talking about essentially running a party within a party, and using them the way they've used us for years. And only on our terms. Stop treating the GOP like a religious cult. Let's reevaluate our relationship with the party and make it less personal and more businesslike. When your employees don't do the job you hired them to do, you don't feel emotionally betrayed and then close up shop. No, you simply fire them and get better employees. This party isn't deserving of our emotions, nor is it worth the salt in our tears. And no political party ever has been. No matter where we go or what we build, we'll eventually manifest the same problems. Trust me, I'm an evangelical. We break up churches and start new denominations all the time, believing that this time we'll get it right. But we forget the problem is ultimately us. Someone once asked G.K. Chesterton, "What's wrong with the world?" He gave them a one-word answer: me. Our nature is fallen, as is all of creation. The Republican Party, or any organization or institution for that matter, is only as good as the people inhabiting it. When we turn a political party into a church and politicians into angels/demigods, we're asking for the very same disappointment we have received. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God's. Do not give Caesar your conscience or virtue. That belongs to God. When Caesar demands either, he's demanding you recognize him as God, and we should have a simple answer for that. No. We don't contort our moral values into a pretzel to justify voting for another Republican hack. We demand that Republican hack meet our standard for hiring, or heaven hath no fury like the next primary cycle. Speaking of primaries, they are the most immediate route to move the country right. In many places, we in the grassroots outnumber the establishment. So as long as we actively and smartly participate in the primary process, replacing these Republicrats is not nearly as hard as we've been led to believe. But for too long, we have ignored the primary process at our own peril. So we're now at the point that the primary really is the election. For if the wrong kind of Republican wins the primary, the general election becomes a moot point. If you're aligned with a conservative or libertarian organization that isn't willing to take a strong and public stand in primaries, get out now. More than likely, they are little more than caretakers for the ruling class, running their own shadow incumbent protection program. Primaries separate the men from the boys. Primaries tell us who's here to really take on the system and who's here to be a part of the system. Seriously, I think if we just did those two things, stopped being partisan loyalists and started participating in primaries en masse, we'd be amazed at how much positive change we could see based off that alone. And that's something you can do even if you want to belong to a third party and not be a full-time Republican. Many states allow you to vote in open primaries or register on the same day as the event. Why not go in, vote for the best constitutional conservative on the ballot, and then get back out if you want? Barack Obama is correct about one thing. We are the people we've been waiting for. Change for the better is not going to come from the top down beginning in Washington, D.C. Change is only going to come from the bottom up when we in the grassroots get mad enough to make it happen. Get mad. Stay mad. Now in your anger, we do not sin. But anger can be a powerful and virtuous motivator when under control. Like when a mama grizzly is angry that a predator threatens her babies. Like when a father is angry that a perpetrator threatens his family. Like when a loving but holy God is angry at what sin has done to his creation. The system is counting on our complacency. And if we're being honest, we have to admit to ourselves, it has every reason to. But we've always been the ones in charge. We've always outnumbered them. We've just been unwilling to act like it. Now is the time for that action. The clock is ticking on these United States of America. The last best hope for human freedom this side of Eden is on the brink of becoming a footnote in human history. Do you want to be the generation that has to look our children in the eye and explain why liberty died? Not on my watch. Who's with me?
So, Chapter 14, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. And the only thing I'd say about this is, again, if we're going to primary people, always the trick is finding somebody to run. Now, he did allude to running ourselves. And that's what I've always suggested. Even better is not just get, run out and say, hey, jump in the primary, but get people that have the same last name as the person you're trying to get rid of. In the case of, let's say, Mitch McConnell, we would encourage all people with the last name McConnell in the state of Kentucky to run in the Republican primary. And in so doing, then we're helping to encourage Mr. McConnell to resign. If there's enough other McConnells on the ballot, 10, 15, he's going to have to try and explain to everybody all the time which McConnell is the right McConnell. Who wants to have to do that? And especially at his age. He doesn't, so he's going to want to resign. The other thing that it's going to do is it creates a de facto recall. And what happens in a recall is all kinds of other politicians that want his seat, because there's a whole bunch of Republicans that would love to be the United States Senator from Kentucky. They'd love that seat. And they may be mayors, there may be the governor of Kentucky, it might be people in the Kentucky state legislature, whoever it is, maybe even people that were not in politics at the moment, but maybe decide they want to get back in. So when they see 15, 20 people named McConnell challenging Mitch McConnell for the seat, then it's easy. They can say, well, tell the other Republicans, the Republican Party, well, just in case. I'm going to throw my hat in just in case, because we don't want to have somebody, some rank amateur end up getting nominated for the position. So that's the way we would handle it. That's the smart way to handle it. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Each individual person is a subject of infinite dignity, but not the creator of value. See, I think that is supremely dangerous talk. When we say that the sovereign self invents value, we are on a very short road to a moral chaos. Rather, we would say at the heart of our social theory ought to be love. What's love? Not a feeling. Love is an act of the will. It's to will the good of the other. If I'm inventing value, I got my value, you got your value, and let's just vaguely tolerate each other, then we can't love each other. Because love has to display itself, as it were, against the background of a hierarchy of objective value. Otherwise, I don't know what I should will for you.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day.
Objectivism, a philosophy brought to life by Ayn Rand that celebrates liberty and capitalism. Objectivism values the individual above all else. It takes away any hint of guilt for achieving success and encourages entrepreneurs to seek their own greatest good. This philosophy declares that our rights can never be granted or taken away from us, as we are each entitled to liberty as our natural birthright. It seeks to liberate individuals from the grasp of oppressive governments, replacing those policies with ones more libertarian in nature. It also insists on personal responsibility for all our actions that hold both heroic potential and life-altering consequences. Embracing liberty and living a meaningful life, this is the spirit of objectivism. Objectivism is the revolutionary philosophy that emphasizes liberty, personal responsibility, reason, and capitalism. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
And that was the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to Hugh Hewitt and his guest, and they're talking about interest rates and debt. And Hugh Hewitt is positing the question, does the average voter understand what happens when interest rates go up and how that affects the debt? The situation on the debt, and the guest is saying, well, no, I don't think that they do, and he's starting to, of course, catastrophize. It's going to be a catastrophe, and it's going to be absolutely horrible and awful, and of course that we in the voters are ignorant and stupid about this kind of thing. And so I guess we're doomed. I guess that's the whole point of this situation. The big problem here for Republicans like Hugh Hewitt is, I think, whether or not he's a conservative is kind of murky. He always says he's center-right, which means nothing. But I assume that he is a Republican. And the problem for the Republicans is they've been singing this song for decades. They were singing this song back in the 80s. Oh, if we don't do something about the debt, then we're going to end up paying $20 for a loaf of bread, on and on and on. And it's never happened. The Republicans make, they make predictions. It doesn't come true. They make another prediction. It doesn't come true. And they look like jackasses. They look like idiots. And they are idiots. This is also why I say, forget making predictions. Make value statements. You can't go wrong with making value statements. Tell me, is it right or is it wrong, number one, to run up at $33 trillion in debt? Number two, is it right or is it wrong to have rising interest rates, which, again, is not happening on its own. It is being made to happen by the Federal Reserve. So, and another one is it right or is it wrong to have an economy run by the federal government rather than run by the markets as in a gold standard economy. Those are things where you cannot go wrong. Those are issues that are unassailable. Once you've established what is right and what is wrong, you're good to go. But when you're making predictions, it's a wild card. You're playing it deuces wild. You are, again, subjecting yourself and your reputation to the winds, so to speak. Who knows what's going to happen when you're making predictions? You predict that interest rates are going to go up. We're going to pay $20 for a loaf of bread, and if it doesn't happen, again, you and everybody you claim to represent looks like a jackass. So don't do that. Make value statements instead. What is right? What is wrong? What should we do? Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit of Stuart Varney.
AW. Back to you, Stephen.
Edward, thanks very much indeed. Stephen Moore with me this morning. Stephen, can the car makers afford these big pay and benefit increases?
That's a good question, especially given the huge losses, Stuart, that these companies like Ford are suffering because of the EV mania. I saw a statistic this morning that Ford is losing something like between $40,000 and $60,000 per car, Stuart, that they're making with EVs because of the cost of the batteries. It's been a bad bet. And look, I'm in favor of workers getting the highest possible wages they can.
So there you go. That last part. The problem is that he doesn't state his conflict of interest if he has one. Is he a member of a union? Because here we have Stuart Varney is. Stuart Varney's not going to be on the air unless he's SAG-AFTRA. So he's a member of a union, but he doesn't come out and announce that. Oh, by the way, I'm a union member. And so you very often have the spectacle of union members interviewing union members about strikes and things of that nature, which is a clear conflict of interest. So again, we're getting ripped off, and Fox and others are making a profit at our expense. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, My Take by Stuart Varney. And what you need to do when you're listening to My Take, listen for value statements. Does he say what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad? Does he say what should or shouldn't happen? Here we go.
In Monday morning, now this. It's getting out of control, and members of Congress are fanning the flames. Democrat Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal says there are racists within the Netanyahu government, and there are racist policies that Israel has been carrying out. The use of the word racist is important. It is a deliberate attempt to bring people of color into the anti-Israel movement. Israel is, they say, an apartheid state. That's a reference to the racial separation policies previously followed in South Africa. It's nonsense. 20% of Israel's population is Arab. They vote. They are prosperous. They say Jews are just colonists stealing the land. That's nonsense. Jews have lived in the region for thousands of years. And let's not forget that after World War II, Jewish people were expelled from Muslim countries by the thousand. This racist narrative is having a dreadful consequence here in America. Black Lives Matter has been quick to jump on the racist charges. In universities across the country, Jews are portrayed as oppressors. At Cornell, the FBI has been called in to investigate threats to slit their throats, for God's sake. A direct reference to Jewish students. Riots at Tulane, with more expected today. 7,000 intimidate New York City's Brooklyn Orthodox Jewish population. What a double standard. If people of color were being threatened and attacked, there would be expulsions and arrests. But when it's Jews, nothing happens. It's out of control. And it is incumbent upon Democrats to do something about the people in their own party who are deliberately dividing our society on racial lines. I'm just getting warmed up for the second hour of Varney and Company.
So the only one statement that he made that was a value statement, and that was the word dreadful. Nowhere else did he use the words right, wrong, good, bad. what should happen, what shouldn't happen. He says it's incumbent upon the Democrat Party to challenge these whoever they are. The only name I think he brought out was Jay Paul. But are there others? No answer. We don't know. But anyways, he doesn't say. What he should have said was the Democrat Party should discipline these individuals. Or better yet, what we hear from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert is that these people should be expelled from Congress. So, again, the only reason I can think of that he doesn't do this is so that he has plausible deniability. He can play both sides against the middle. Nobody can say he's a pro-Jew. Nobody can say he's pro-Muslim. And he also, apparently, because of the tone of voice, if you listen to that's the other thing, tone of voice, a sense of urgency in his voice that must be compelling enough to draw eyes and ears and bring in the ratings. Because after all, Fox is greedy, he's greedy, and he's the bloody tourist. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Speaker Mike Johnson.
Do you see in Joe Biden a cognitive decline? And if so, is that a danger to the country?
I do. I think most of us do. That's reality. This is not a personal slight to him. It has to do with age and acumen, and everyone's different. Everyone ages differently. Clearly, if you look at a tape of Joe Biden making an argument in the Senate Judiciary Committee a few years ago, and you see a speech that he delivers now, there's a difference. Again, I mean, it's not a personal insult to him. It's just reality.
And that was Speaker Mike Johnson. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Matt Gaetz.
The whole goal is to get to single subject spending bills because we believe as conservatives that's the only way to attack a lobbyist-driven system that mushes these various agencies of government together for one massive up or down vote. In the first 7 months that Kevin McCarthy was Speaker of the House, you know how many single subject appropriations bills we passed? One. In the first 36 hours of Mike Johnson being Speaker, we already passed one. He's going to work us bayou hours because he's from Louisiana, and we're probably going to ditch the French work week that has governed the Congress for far too long. So that's the way to get individual amendments considered that might drive down pressure on spending. And they are hand-wringing and bedwetting out on K Street in the lobby corps because they don't totally own the Speaker of the House for the first time, certainly since I've been in Congress, and probably since you have too, Trey.
And that was Matt Gaetz. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, former President Barack Obama presents the Medal of Honor for Clint Romesha.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Michelle Obama, accompanied by Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant Clinton Romesha.
Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, from whom we come, to whom we belong, and whose service we find peace, hear our prayer. Centuries ago, were written to be called and a spur to the faithful servants of truth and justice. Arm yourselves, be ye men of valor, be in readiness for the conflict. It is better for us to perish in battle, look upon the outrage of our nation. Today, Lord God, we pause to recognize men of valor who were in readiness for the conflict. The Battle of Candish came upon them. Their sacred story is one of life and of death, a selfless service faithfully rendered at the moment of truth. It rightly belongs to that small band of Black Knights. As a nation grateful for the spirit of the men who follow and the man who leads, we offer our gratitude for the actions of those men that day and for the actions of, as the author wrote, an intense guy, short and wiry. Thank you, O God, for the honor of claiming their sacred story and writing it into our nation's history. We bestow our nation's highest honors upon Staff Sergeant Romeshay and recognize his actions that day at Cop Keating. Grant unto us your holy presence. We pray your abiding grace and eternal mercies upon the families, the friends who gave the last full measure of devotion that day. Staff Sergeant Vernon Martin, Staff Sergeant Justin Gallegos, Staff Sergeant Joshua Hart, Sergeant Joshua Kirk, Sergeant Michael Scusa, Sergeant Christopher Griffin, Specialist Stephen Mace, and PFC Kevin Thompson. Now we ask your blessing upon all of our servicemen and women at home and abroad as they support and defend our Constitution. Grant wisdom and guidance to those who lead our nation. As Sergeant Romeshay's example, guide our service and inspire our devotion. We ask this and pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated, everybody. Good afternoon. And on behalf of Michelle and myself, welcome to the White House. Now, every day at the White House, we receive thousands of letters from folks all across America. And at night, upstairs in my study, I read a few. About 3 years ago, I received a letter from a mom in West Virginia. Her son, Stephen, a specialist in the Army, just 21 years old, had given his life in Afghanistan. She had received the condolence letter that I had sent to her family, as I send to every family of the fallen. And she wrote me back. Mr. President, she said, you wrote me a letter telling me that my son was a hero. I just wanted you to know what kind of hero he was. My son was a great soldier, she wrote. As far back as I can remember, Stephen wanted to serve his country. She spoke of how he loved his brothers in B Troop, how he would do anything for them. And of the brave actions that would cost Stephen his life, she wrote, his sacrifice was driven by pure love. Today we are honored to be joined by Stephen's mother, Vanessa, and his father, Larry. Okay, please stand, Vanessa and Larry. We're joined by the families of the 7 other Patriots who also gave their lives that day. Can we please have them stand so we can acknowledge them as well? We're joined by members of Bravo Troop, whose courage that day was driven by pure love. And we gather to present the Medal of Honor to one of these soldiers, Staff Sergeant Clinton L. Romeshay. Clint, this is our nation's highest military decoration. It reflects the gratitude of our entire country. And so we're joined by members of Congress, leaders from across our armed forces, including Secretary of Defense Leon Pinette, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marty Dempsey, Army Secretary John McHugh, and Army Chief of Staff General Ray Odierno. We are especially honored to be joined by Clint's 4th Infantry Division, Iron Horse soldiers, and members of the Medal of Honor Society who today welcome you into their ranks. Now, despite all this attention, you may already have a sense that Clint is a pretty humble guy. We just spent some time together in the Oval Office. He grew up in Lake City, California, population less than 100. We welcomed his family, including mom and dad, Tish and Gary. Clint, I hope he doesn't mind that he shared that Clint was actually born at home. These days, Clint works in the oil fields of North Dakota. He is a man of faith, and after more than a decade in uniform, he says the thing he looks forward to the most is just being a husband and a father. In fact, this is not even the biggest event for Clint this week, because tomorrow he and his wife Tammy will celebrate their 13th wedding anniversary. Clint and Tammy, this is probably not the kind of intimate anniversary you planned, but we're so glad that you're here, along with your 3 beautiful children, Desi, Gwen, and Colin. Colin is not as shy as Clint. He was in the Oval Office, and he was racing around pretty good and sampled a number of the apples before he found the one that was just right. Now, to truly understand the extraordinary actions for which Clint is being honored, you need to understand the almost unbelievable conditions under which he and B Troop served. This was a time in 2009 when many of our troops still served in small, rugged outposts, even as our commanders were shifting their focus to larger towns and cities. So, Combat Outpost Keating was a collection of buildings of concrete and plywood with trenches and sandbags. Of all the outposts in Afghanistan, Keating was among the most remote. It sat at the bottom of a steep valley, surrounded by mountains, terrain that a later investigation said gave ideal cover for insurgents to attack. Cop Keating, the investigation found, was tactically indefensible. But that's what these soldiers were asked to do, defend the indefensible. The attack came in the morning, just as the sun rose. Some of our guys were standing guard. Most, like Clint, were still sleeping. The explosions shook them out of their beds and sent them rushing for their weapons. And soon the awful odds became clear. These 53 Americans were surrounded by more than 300 Taliban fighters. What happened next has been described as one of the most intense battles of the entire war in Afghanistan. The attackers had the advantage, the high ground, the mountains above, and they were unleashing everything they had. Rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, mortars, snipers taking aim. To those Americans down below, the fire was coming in from every single direction. They'd never seen anything like it. With gunfire impacting all around him, Clint raced to one of the barracks and grabbed a machine gun. He took aim at one of the enemy machine teams and took it out. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded, sending shrapnel into his hip, his arm, and his neck. But he kept fighting, disregarding his own wounds and tending to an injured comrade instead. Then, over the radio, came words no soldier ever wants to hear. Enemy in the wire. The Taliban had penetrated the camp. They were taking over buildings. The combat was close at times as close as 10 feet. When Clint took aim at 3 of them, they never took another step. But still, the enemy advanced. So the Americans pulled back to buildings that were easier to defend to make one last stand. One of them was later compared to the Alamo. One of them later compared it to the Alamo. Keating, it seemed, was going to be overrun, and that's when Clint Romeshay decided to retake that camp. Clint gathered up his guys, and they began to fight their way back, storming one building, then another, pushing the enemy back, having to actually shoot up at the enemy in the mountains above. By now, most of the camp was on fire. Amid the flames and smoke, Clint stood in the doorway, calling in airstrikes that shook the earth all around them. Over the radio, they heard comrades who were pinned down in a Humvee. So Clint and his team unloaded everything they had into the enemy positions, and with that cover, 3 wounded Americans made their escape, including a grievously injured Stephen Mace. But more Americans, their bodies, were still out there. And Clint Romeshay lives the soldier's creed: I will never leave a fallen comrade. So he and his team started charging as enemy fire poured down. And they kept charging, 50 meters, 80 meters, ultimately a 100-meter run through a hail of bullets. They reached their fallen friends, and they brought them home. And throughout history, the question has often been asked, why? Why do those in uniform take such extraordinary risks? And what compels them to such courage? You ask Clint and any of these soldiers who are here today, and they'll tell you, yes, they fight for their country, and they fight for our freedom. Yes, they fight to come home to their families. But most of all, they fight for each other, to keep each other safe and to have each other's backs. When I called Clint to tell him that he would receive this medal, he said he was honored, but he also said it wasn't just me out there, it was a team effort. And so today, we also honor this American team, including those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Private First Class Kevin Thompson, who would have turned 26 years old today. Sergeant Michael Scusa. Sergeant Joshua Kirk. Sergeant Christopher Griffin. Staff Sergeant Justin Gallegos. Staff Sergeant Vernon Martin. Sergeant Joshua Hart. Specialist Stephen Mace. Each of these patriots gave their lives looking out for each other. In a battle that raged all day, that brand of selflessness was displayed again and again and again. Soldiers exposing themselves to enemy fire to pull a comrade to safety, tending to each other's wounds, performing buddy transfusions, giving each other their own blood. If you seek a measure of that day, you need to look no further than the medals and ribbons that grace their chests. For their sustained heroism, 37 Army Commendation Medals. For their wounds, 27 Purple Hearts. For their valor, 18 Bronze Stars. For their gallantry, 9 Silver Stars. These men were outnumbered, outgunned, and almost overrun. Looking back, one of them said, "I'm surprised any of us made it out." But they are here today. And I would ask these soldiers, this band of brothers, to stand and accept the gratitude of our entire nation. There are many lessons from Cop Keating. One of them is that our troops should never, ever be put in a position where they have to defend the indefensible. But that's what these soldiers did for each other in sacrifice driven by pure love. And because they did, 8 grieving families were at least able to welcome their soldiers home one last time. And more than 40 American soldiers are alive today to carry on, to keep alive the memory of their fallen brothers, to help make sure that this country that we love so much remains strong and free. What was it that turned the tide that day? How was it that so few Americans prevailed against so many? As we prepared for the reading of the citation, I'll leave you with the words of Clint himself. Because they say something about our Army and they say something about America. They say something about our spirit, which will never be broken. We weren't going to be beat that day, Clint said. You're not going to back down in the face of adversity like that. We were just going to win, plain and simple. God bless you, Clint Romeshay, and all of your team. God bless all who serve, and God bless the United States of America. With that, I'd like the citation to be read.
The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Clinton L. Romeshay, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Staff Sergeant Clinton L. Romeshay distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as a section leader with Bravo Troop, 3rd Squadron, 61st Cavalry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division during combat operations against an armed enemy at Combat Outpost Keating, Kamdesh District, Nuristan Province, Afghanistan, on October 3rd, 2009. On that morning, Staff Sergeant Romeshay and his comrades awakened to an attack by an estimated 300 enemy fighters occupying the high ground on all 4 sides of the complex, employing concentrated fire from recoilless rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-aircraft machine guns, mortars, and small arms fire. Staff Sergeant Romeshay moved uncovered under intense enemy fire to conduct a reconnaissance of the battlefield and seek reinforcements from the barracks before returning to action with the support of an assistant gunner. Staff Sergeant Romeshay took out an enemy machine gun team and, while engaging a second, the generator he was using for cover was struck by a rocket-propelled grenade, inflicting him with shrapnel wounds. Undeterred by his injuries, Staff Sergeant Romeshay continued to fight, and upon the arrival of another soldier to aid him and the assistant gunner, he again rushed through the exposed avenue to assemble additional soldiers. Staff Sergeant Romeshay then mobilized a 5-man team and returned to the fight equipped with a sniper rifle. With complete disregard for his own safety, Staff Sergeant Romeshay continually exposed himself to heavy enemy fire as he moved confidently about the battlefield, engaging and destroying multiple enemy targets, including 3 Taliban fighters who had breached the combat outpost's perimeter. While orchestrating a successful plan to secure and reinforce key points of the battlefield, Staff Sergeant Romeshay maintained radio communication with the Tactical Operations Center. As the enemy forces attacked with even greater ferocity, unleashing a barrage of rocket-propelled grenades and recoilless rifle rounds, Staff Sergeant Romeshay identified the point of attack and directed air support to destroy over 30 enemy fighters. After receiving reports that seriously injured soldiers were at a distant battle position, Staff Sergeant Romeshay and his team provided covering fire to allow the injured soldiers to safely reach the aid station. Upon receipt of orders to proceed to the next objective, his team pushed forward 100 meters under overwhelming enemy fire to recover and prevent the enemy fighters from taking the bodies of their fallen comrades. Staff Sergeant Romeshay's heroic actions throughout the day-long battle were critical in suppressing an enemy that had far greater numbers. His extraordinary efforts gave Bravo Troop the opportunity to regroup, reorganize, and prepare for the counterattack that allowed the troop to account for its personnel and secure combat outpost Keating. Staff Sergeant Romeshay's discipline and extraordinary heroism above and beyond the call of duty reflect great credit upon himself, Bravo Troop, 3rd Squadron, 61st Cavalry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division, and the United States Army.
Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.